Welcome to episode 7 of my brand new Aquascaping Beginner's Guide. In this mini-series I'm starting completely from scratch so I can show you everything you need to know about aquascaping from start to finish. I'll be setting up 2 tanks, one low-tech and one high-tech, so there's something for everybody. I'll show you what equipment you need, how to create nice hardscapes and select the right plants, how to deal with algae and just general maintenance. If you want to start aquascaping or just get better at it, then this one is for you. Okay, the last video of the 2025 Aquascaping Beginner's Guide. In the next few days I'll start taking these 2 tanks down, but before I do that I owe you guys one more video, which is the full cost breakdown as well as a Q&A. If this is your first time seeing these 2 tanks, you probably want to start at the very beginning. There's an entire playlist dedicated to this beginner's guide. I think it's 6 episodes in total. I think this is episode 7. So I'll leave a link to the playlist in the video description. But before we start, do you guys notice anything different? It's actually the light. A lot of you guys asked me to swap the lights and you wanted to see how the high-tech tank would look with the low-tech or low-budget light. So I've now added the Chihiros to this tank and the Twinstar is on that tank. It's kind of funny because it actually looks quite good in my opinion. The Chihiros really brings out the greens, and the Twinstar actually really brings out the reds, especially in the carpet with the Galantium. So yeah, it looks quite good. I think I'm going to keep it like this for the remaining days. But let's start with the full cost breakdown. I've collected all the receipts from this project. Basically everything you see here was bought and paid for with my own money. Nothing here was sponsored except for the plants in the substrate. I have a long-term collaboration with Dennerle Plants, and they provided the plants and the substrate for this project. Everything else was bought and paid for with my own money. So let's begin with the low-tech, low-budget aquarium. I didn't really try to go for the cheapest stuff, just something that's still affordable and still good quality as well. So the tank for the low-tech aquarium was 90 euros, the Dennerle Scaper tank 55 liters. The internal filter was 25 euros, the heater was 35 euros, the light was 70 euros, a little bit more on the expensive side, and the background foil was 7 euros. That comes down to a total of 227 euros just for the equipment. Then for the decoration, I'm going to call it, substrate, wood, rocks, glue and plants. Substrate was 40 euros. We used 1 9-liter bag of AQUASOIL. The wood was 44 euros. We used 1 medium and 2 smaller pieces of wood. The rocks, the black lava stones, these were kind of like premium black lava stones, so they were 41 euros. Then we glued it all together with liquid super glue. That was 4 euros. And then we used a total of 10 different plants. I kind of calculated roughly 6 euros per plant, so that comes down to a total of 60 euros for the plants. And then we have a grand total of 189 euros for the decoration. Then lastly, just the inhabitants. So for this tank, we bought 8 Galaxy Rasboras, which was 40 euros, and 8 Pascal Rainbows, which were also 40 euros. And then I didn't buy them, but I also added a cleanup crew with some cherry shrimp and some snail and some other cinclus. I wrote down a total of 20 euros for that. So everything together, the equipment, the decoration and the animals, comes down to a total of 560 euros. So I think that's definitely affordable for an aquarium of this size. We could definitely make it cheaper as well, but it was not the goal to make this the cheapest possible aquascape. Okay, then let's move on to the high-tech aquarium. For this one we use an OptiWhite glass tank, so that one was 110 euros. We use an external canvas filter with a built-in heater, which was 130 euros. I also added a glass lily pipe set, which was 35 euros. And I used flexible filter hose from Chihiros, 20 euros. And then we also used the CO2 system, of course. That one was 162 euros. That's everything. That's the CO2 cylinder, the regulator, solenoid, diffuser, and tubing as well. Then the light. So basically this one, the Twinstar 450 Series 4, something like that. 160 euros for the light, and we also used the premium background foil, which was 15 euros. So that comes down to a total of 632 euros for the equipment. Then we basically in both tanks used the same substrate, the same hardscape, so the total for the decoration is exactly the same, also 189 euros. And for the inhabitants we added 8 Kubutai Rasboras, which was 32 euros. And we also added 8 green neon tetras. These were quite cheap, so only 20 euros for 8 green neon tetras. And then again 20 euros for the cleanup crew. So that comes down to a total of 70 euros for the animals. Then the grand total for the high-tech tank is 893 euros. So 632 euros for the low-tech tank and 893 for the high-tech tank. So definitely a big difference. But as you can see, there's a huge difference in terms of plant growth and just the overall look of the aquarium as well. I think it's definitely worth it. Okay, so we're done with the full cost breakdown. So let's move on to the Q&A. I think it was 3 weeks ago when I did a post on YouTube and on Instagram where you guys could submit your questions. And we got a lot of questions, guys. Kind of makes me wonder if I didn't do a good job with this beginner series. I didn't explain things enough, but I mean, it's a complicated hobby, right? Like, people always have questions. So let's start with the questions from YouTube, and after that we'll do the questions from Instagram. I've kind of just been browsing through all the comments, and one thing that seems to keep coming up is the question, how do I find the right balance between the light, the CO2 and the nutrients? Because that is something that I speak a lot about in my videos. And the best answer for that is to start slowly with your light, start slowly with your fertilizer, and CO2 should always be the same. So for example, with the light, my suggestion would be, if you're a beginner, start with 6 hours and then just every week add half an hour until you reach 8 hours. I usually don't go over 8 hours with my tanks. All the lights in my studio are on from 1 p.m. until 9 p.m. So by the time you reach 8 hours, the tank's already kind of developed a little bit, the plants have started growing and they can really use the light properly. You know, if you start with 8 hours from the very beginning, usually, I mean, it can work, but sometimes, you know, especially if you're a little bit inexperienced, things can quickly go wrong. So I would just start with 6 and slowly build up to 8. Same thing can apply for fertilizer. So I would never start with the full dose from day one, because usually, you know, you have very little plant mass at the very beginning. Plants are still kind of adjusting to these new conditions. So they will not take up as many nutrients as, for example, a fully grown in tank. So with the fertilizer, you can start with half a dose and just keep doing it until you kind of feel like, okay, I've got a good healthy plant mass now, let's continue with the full dose. And the CO2 is very simple, just use a drop checker. If you have a nice lime green drop checker, then you always have enough CO2 and you don't need to worry about that. So if you do all those 3 things that I just mentioned, then your tank should be off to a good start. And after that, it's mostly observing, kind of observing how the tank is reacting to those increases in light and increases in fertilizer. And it's also really important to know about algae and which algae appears for what reason, because then you can take action. For example, if you're starting to see a lot of green dust algae on the glass, you're probably dosing a little bit too much liquid fertilizers, you can reduce that again. Or if you're starting to see a lot of hair algae, probably the light is too strong, so you can reduce that again. So it's a lot of observing and taking small actions to find the right balance. Now let's move on to some questions from @LifeInArium. He has some questions about RO water, which I can understand can be quite confusing. So first up, when using RO water and a TDS meter, what level do you aim for and why? So in my aquariums, I aim for a TDS or a ppm of 120. And 120 ppm should give me a GH of about 3, which is ideal. And that's also what Green Aqua is using, so kind of just copy their methods. And the second question is, when it comes to topping off water, do you just use RO water or do you have to remineralize the top of water as well? No, the top of water you don't remineralize, you just use pure RO water. Because the water evaporates, but the minerals, they stay in the aquarium, so you don't need to add minerals for the top of water. And number 3, when doing a big water change, how do you know how much to remineralize since the water in the tank is already mineralized? So when I'm doing a water change, I will just add pure RO water, and then once the tank is full, I will measure again with the TDS meter, and then usually it's about 80 or 90, so then I just add more minerals until it's back to 120 again. Next up, quick question from @LeslieArrington1996, hope I pronounced that correctly. Leslie is planning a 5.5 gallon planted betta fish tank, and the question is, do you add minerals specific to betta fish and plant minerals? There's no difference. Minerals are minerals. There's no specific minerals for bettas or specific minerals for other fish. It's all the same. Next up, a question from @Detlef1790. Which brand is your algae scraper from? I'm guessing the black one. This one right here, black algae scraper. This one is actually from a brand called Ista. This one was a gift from when I went to visit my friends over at AQUASOIL in Poland. They gave this algae scraper as a gift. It's working really well. Has these changeable metal blades. You can find these on Amazon as well from different brands, but this one's really good. Ista algae scraper. Next question, when is the right moment to add a cleanup crew and what are the right levels of nitrates and nitrites? So the right moment to add a cleanup crew is when you're starting to see the first signs of algae, which is usually brown algae, which usually appears after 2 to 3 weeks. So by then the tank should be pretty much cycled and you can add a cleanup crew, Olosynculus, Samana shrimp, Triton snails, stuff like that. And what are the right levels of nitrates and nitrites? Well, nitrite should always be 0. Nitrate, yeah, I mean, some people like to keep it at a certain level, but I think in my tanks, if I will measure right now, nitrates will pretty much be 0 as well. Actually, we can do a little test. So I've got these little, easy, simple test strips. They're not super accurate, but for this example, they will work quite well. So nitrate is the top one. I mean, it's a bit difficult to see, but it's basically 0. So does that mean there is no nitrate in this aquarium? I think there's no nitrate in the water column, but there's probably some nitrate in the substrate. Probably nitrate in the plant cells as well, because I am dosing liquid fertilizer quite regularly, but the plants just immediately absorb it, and that's what I would just focus on as well. Look at your plants. If they look healthy, then don't worry too much about your nitrate levels. Next question, is it better to use RO water for a high-tech setup than using the chlorinated tap water? Not necessarily. It kind of just depends on the water quality where you live. So for example, here in the Netherlands where I live, the tap water is quite hard, and in general most aquatic plants grow better in soft water, so that's why I'm using RO water. I'm pretty sure I could still get the same results with my tap water as well, but probably the plants would grow a little bit slower. I probably would have a little bit more algae issues as well, so that's why RO water in this case just makes my life a little bit easier. Okay, next question is, do I notice a difference between normal float glass and the clear opti-white glass? Basically with these small nano tanks, I don't really notice a huge difference, but with thicker glass you do notice quite a difference. For example, in the Hames gallery where I'm working at these past few months, they have one 4-foot tank which is made from float glass, and all the other tanks are now made of opti-white glass. And the float glass tank does have a much kind of like a greener tint. So yeah, in bigger tanks with thicker glass, I definitely notice a difference. And I think upgrading to opti-white is definitely worth it as well. Okay, next up, quite an interesting question. When trimming stem plants, should I always replant them or can I cut them and throw them away? If I always throw them away, will the plant eventually thin out and die or just look ugly? So first part, I would only replant the trimmings if you're not happy or not satisfied with the density of the plants. So for example, this tank, the planting is already super dense. So if I were to trim here, I would just throw the trimmings away. This tank is not that dense yet. So if I were to trim in here, I would definitely replant all the trimmings. So it just kind of depends. Then the second part of the question, if I always throw them away, will the plant eventually thin out and die? At some point you will notice that the bottom part of the stems will just not look very nice anymore. If that's the case, I would trim the stems, save all the nice looking the top parts basically, then take out the lower part of the stems with the roots and everything, and then just only replant the nice stems and basically just start from scratch again. How long do you typically run a tank before you rescape it? I would say 6 months. These tanks, I started them in October last year and it is now almost March, so yeah, almost 6 months. The tank behind you guys is 60p. It's also been running for more than 6 months. I'm going to rescape that one soon as well. I have an ADA Mini M here, which has been up and running for, I think, more than 6 months, which is due for rescape. Yeah, I would say about 6 months. How much flow do the tanks need, particularly near the substrate? Do you clean filter weekly, especially if it's a canister? I don't really pay attention to flow near the substrate. I just go for the general rule of 10 times the volume of the aquarium per hour. Do you clean the filter weekly? Definitely not. So these tanks are now 6 months old, and I think in the 6 months I've cleaned the filter once, which was actually quite recent, so only after 4 months maybe. I would say clean the filter when you noticed a decrease in the overall output of the filter. I'd like to know the difference in fertilizer and lighting level used between the two tanks. So fertilizer in this tank I will dose 1 pump, and in this tank I will dose 2 pumps. So basically this one gets double the amount of fertilizer. And lighting levels, I'm basically now running both lights on 100%, but of course this one is a little bit more powerful than this one. I'll put all the light wattages and power on the screen. Okay, next question is about my cats, basically asking how do I prevent them from jumping in my aquariums? Well, basically I don't. They just don't jump in my aquariums. They don't feel the need to do that. They do prefer aquarium water over tap water in their bowl. So I have a small aquarium on my desk, and sometimes they'll drink from that. That's the only aquarium cat related thing that I can tell you. My cats don't jump in my aquariums. Next question, my thoughts on the Chihiros B series. Yeah, I mean, I quite like it. It's definitely a budget light. The only thing I don't really like is the legs. You know, they kind of look a little bit cheap. They're a little bit wonky as well. Like the light is not sitting completely flush on the glass. But in terms of the output and the color, I like it a lot. And this one was 70 euros, I think, for an aquarium light with these specs, which is app controlled as well. I think it's a really good light. Next up, quite an interesting question. What is the longevity of a densely planted aquarium? It's a bit difficult to answer because, like I said, most of my tanks only run for 6 months until I rescape them. But I think you can keep them for quite a long time. I recently went to Japan to the ADA gallery, and there's still a few tanks from Mr. Amano. And Mr. Amano passed away in 2015. So those tanks are more than 10 years old. And I'm not 100% sure, but you know, of course, at some point they will kind of replant them. I think when they replant them, they will kind of siphon off like a little top layer from the AQUASOIL, then add a thin fresh layer, and then replant it. But how often they do that, I'm not exactly sure. But you know, I think for most people, yeah, you can keep them for a very long time. And just when you see that the plants are suffering because of some nutrient deficiency, just add more root temps into your AQUASOIL, and then you should be able to keep it going for a lot of years. So I think there's just not really a clear answer, but pretty much if you maintain it well, you should be able to keep your aquascape running for as long as possible. It's just all about maintenance. Next up, when using CO2 in your aquarium, when should you expect the drop checker to turn green? I would say within the first hour of the lights turning on. So in this aquarium or in my studio, the lights turn on at 1 p.m. So if by 2 p.m. the drop checker is not yet nice lime green color, I will increase the CO2. I do increase it or start it even earlier. It depends kind of on the size of the aquarium. Normally I will start the CO2 1 hour or 2 hours before, but yeah, you can either increase it a little bit, which turns green faster, or you can start the CO2 earlier, so it should also turn green faster, basically. Another interesting question, looking at the high-tech tank, how do you get such dense stem plants? I have a few different ones in my low-tech tank, but I find they don't tend to bush up as much. Is this to do with trimming and replanting, or CO2 and lights, or all of the above? Yeah, basically all of the above. So in the low-tech tank, you can see that the stems are just not as dense as in the high-tech tank. And I think I've trimmed and replanted both tanks only once. Yeah, in here stems are a lot more dense. Of course, that has to do with the light intensity. It has to do with the CO2, so plants grow faster. But also because of the higher energy, the plants will actually make more side shoots as well. It kind of depends. It's not with every plant, but a good example is the Ludwigia Super Red. So in this aquarium, it makes a lot more side shoots, but in the low-tech aquarium, it's mostly just one stem, you know? Now let's do some questions from Instagram. First one, is it okay to start with CO2 only for a couple of months and then run without it? It's a good question. So for example, this tank is now fully grown in. So what would happen if I were now to remove the CO2? I mean, in this state, it would look good for quite a while without CO2. But of course, at some point you have to trim the plants. And then eventually they will grow back again, but they will not grow back looking as nicely as with CO2. For example, the vase behind me, I started the vase with CO2 and I removed it after 2, maybe 3 months. It's now been running without CO2 for, yeah, again, also 3 months or something. And it looks good, but it doesn't look as good as it did with CO2. But the plants have significantly slowed down in growth, so it does make it a lot easier to maintain. It just doesn't look as good. Why did you choose not to replace one of the sponges with biological filter media? Yeah, it's a good question. I think in both filters I didn't use any biological filter media. Basically, I just wanted to use the product straight out of the box without modifying it. I just want to keep it as simple as possible and show you that you can still get good results without, you know, using all the special filter media and all these additives and stuff like that. I wanted to keep it simple. How many fish can you keep in a tank? Yeah, how many fish can you keep? I mean, the amount of fish that we have in here right now, I've added a few more because I've stripped down one tank, so I had to add a few more fish. I would say in both tanks we now have about 25 nano fish. And I think that's a good amount. I think there's a general rule of 1 centimeter of fish per liter. And yeah, it's a very general rule. Sometimes it applies, sometimes it doesn't apply. This tank is 55 liters, so I could have 55 centimeters of fish. I mean, let's say that all these nanofish are about 2 centimeters, so I could have 25, 26 nanofish. I guess that makes sense, yeah. So maybe the 1 centimeter fish per liter, maybe that's a good rule to start with. Next up, what is the optimal temperature for the water? I'm from India and here the temperature is too high. Yeah, I would say 22, 23 degrees Celsius is optimal. That's what I have most of my tanks, and plants grow well at the temperature, and algae doesn't grow as well. Algae will always grow better in warmer temperatures, so if you're from a warm country, you're probably struggling a bit more. If you only want to keep easy medium plants, is it then necessary to use CO2? No, it's not necessary. I mean, in here we only have easy and medium plants, but yeah, I mean, it's just what you prefer. I think this, in my opinion, this tank looks a lot nicer, so that's why I'm using CO2. But it's not necessary. How to maximize the red color in plants? Basically 2 things: strong light and low nitrogen. So for example, in this tank I have the Halantium Tellalum red, which is a nice reddish color. If I were to start dosing more nitrogen, then probably the red color will slowly disappear. But having a very low nitrate level will help to maximize the red color in plants. A lot of questions about my fertilizer dosing regime. To be honest with you guys, I don't really have a regime. I kind of just dose whenever I remember. If you watch my videos, then you know that I always put a lot of nutrients in the substrate, and because of that I can just sometimes forget to dose. That's not really a bad thing. But I would say in general I will dose fertilizer 3 to 4 times per week, and then it's usually the recommended dose. But the recommended dose for a daily regime. So I would say probably dose half the recommended dose if I'm only dosing 3 to 4 days a week. As a beginner, should you keep a rigid maintenance schedule? I would think so. I would just choose one day of the week where you're not that busy. And for me, that's always a Saturday. So I like to do my maintenance on a Saturday morning, and do it every week as well. And if I do it every week, then it's not that much work, you know, just a quick water change, a little glass cleaning, fill it back up, and you're done. And then once a month there's a trimming session involved, so then it's a little bit longer. But yeah, if you just clean the tank once per week, then it's easy and you don't really get sick of it, you know. Okay, one more question before we wrap it up. I think this one is quite interesting. What are your glaring setbacks you saw from low tech versus high tech, and vice versa? So things that didn't really go well with these 2 beginner tanks. And let's start with the low tech tank. I mean, in general, plants look okay, but one thing that I definitely struggled with was the carpet. So we started in this tank with the hairgrass, and I think I always told people, like, you can have a hairgrass carpet in a low tech tank, but I think I'm going to change that because this tank is now 6 months old, and the hairgrass, it has barely grown. Like I don't really have a full carpet, you know. Later on I did add the Halantium Tellalum, which has grown much better, but also we don't have a full carpet of that. So bit of a bummer that we don't really have this nice lush green carpet in a low tech aquarium, you know. So yeah, basically if I would start over with the series, I would choose a different carpeting plant. I would probably start from the very beginning with the Halantium. Background plants, I did later on add the Meriphyllum mothergrossense, which is growing very well. So that's a very good beginner's plant, a very good low-tech plant. Yeah, that's about it for this tank. The setback for the high-tech tank. The thing with high-tech, that's a lot more, it's a lot easier to get it out of balance, you know. Like for example with this tank, I had some issues with CO2, and like almost immediately you run into some algae issues. So you can see right now that some of the plants are covered in sort of like a short hair algae, and that was because I had some issues with CO2, and it's quite difficult to get rid of it, you know. So it's very easy in the high-tech tank to upset the balance, and then you're, for a couple of weeks you're kind of struggling to get it balanced again. But I think that's it. I don't think I have any other setbacks with these 2 tanks. Overall, this was a really fun series to make. 7 episodes in total. It was a lot of work, but totally worth it. Hope you guys enjoyed the series as well. I'll probably do it again next year in 2026, but for now this is it. Guys, thanks for watching. See you on the next one.